That's not just a title. It's what really happened to me. One quiet morning, when strangers walked onto my land, wearing vests, carrying clipboards, acting like they owned everything I worked for. I warned them once. They laughed. I warned them twice. They ignored me. So I gave them one sound they would never forget. The pump of my shotgun. And in that moment, everything changed. Welcome back to HOA Stories, where the suburbs aren't as quiet as they seem. My name is Daniel. I live on the edge of a small town in Texas, a place where the houses are neat, the lawns are perfect, and the HOA believes they rule us all. But I'm not the kind of man who bows to a board. I'm a homeowner, a father, and someone who believes in protecting what's his. And this is the story of the day the HOA crossed the wrong property line. That morning was too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel natural, like the air itself was holding a secret. I walked out onto my porch with a cup of coffee in my hand, steam rising, birds calling in the distance. For a moment, everything looked normal, but then I saw them. Two men in yellow vests were standing near the edge of my property. They weren't neighbors, they weren't visitors, they were strangers, and they were already working like they owned the place. One of them held a clipboard. The other carried a long rod with a GPS sensor on top. Behind them, a truck was parked with the engine still running. Letters on the side said, HOA Survey in bold print. My stomach turned hot with anger. They hadn't knocked, they hadn't called, they hadn't even looked at me. This was my land I paid for with my own sweat and time. And here they were, treating it like it belonged to them. I called out, "Hey, you're on private property." The one with the clipboard didn't even raise his head. He just scribbled something due. When like I was background noise, the other one smirked and adjusted his gear, like I was some character in a play that he had already read before. I took a step closer, this time louder. I said, "You're on private property." Finally, the man in the green polo turned. The words on his back were clear now. HOA Inspector. He gave me a smile, but his eyes stayed flat. "No, sir. You're mistaken," he said slowly. "This is HOA land. We have the right to be here." The arrogance in his voice boiled me from the inside. HOA land. I bought this property. I paid every bill, every tax, every nail in this house was mine. Yet here they were, calling it theirs, like I was just renting space in their kingdom. I felt my grip tighten on the coffee cup. I wanted to smash it right there in the dirt, but instead, I said, "You better pack your things and leave right now." The inspector chuckled under his breath, not loud, but just enough, the kind of laugh that says you don't matter. Behind him, another worker in a hard hat started setting up a tripod, carefully adjusting the legs, not even looking my way, like my warning didn't exist. My blood pounded in my ears. It wasn't just disrespect, it was invasion. And I knew. These men weren't going to stop just because I asked nicely. I walked back toward the house, every step heavier than the last. I could feel their eyes on my back. I could almost hear their whispers. "He's bluffing. He won't do anything." But they didn't know me. Inside, I placed the empty coffee cup on the counter, and I opened the cabinet. My shotgun was there, waiting. Cold steel, solid weight, the sound of protection. I held it in my hands and breathed deep. I wasn't going to hurt anyone, but I was going to remind them. This wasn't a playground. This wasn't theirs to take. When I stepped back onto the porch, the air changed. The inspector's smile cracked. The worker at the tripod froze, and the man with the clipboard finally looked up. Their pens stopped scratching. Their boots shifted in the grass. The balance of power shifted in a single second. I didn't raise the gun. I didn't point it. I didn't need to. All I did was pump it once. The sharp metallic sound cut the silence like lightning, and in that moment, I saw fear, real fear, the kind of fear that makes a man remember where the property line ends. The inspector stepped back, hands half raised. "We're just doing our job," he muttered, but his voice cracked like old wood. I stood firm. "This is my land, and you know it." The tension hung heavy in the air, like a storm about to break, and for the first time, I felt them hesitate. But here's the thing. Surveyors don't give up easy, and HOAs, they always come back harder. The surveyors didn't leave right away. They stood frozen, like deer caught in headlights. The inspector's fake smile was gone now, his jaw clenched tight. his pride fighting his fear. For a long moment, nobody moved. The sound of the shotgun pump still hung in the air, a reminder that this land wasn't theirs to take. Finally, the man with the clipboard cleared his throat. He forced out words he didn't really believe. "You'll regret this. The board will hear about it." The arrogance in his voice was shaking now, like a glass about to crack. But still, he didn't drop that clipboard. He held on to it like it was a shield. I stared him down, and slowly, step by step, they began to retreat, their boots crunching on the gravel as they backed away. The inspector kept glancing over his shoulder, like he wanted to say more, but couldn't find the courage. Their truck door slammed shut, the engine growled, and in seconds, the trespassers were gone. But the silence they left behind was heavier than before, because deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't over. The HOA doesn't forget. They don't forgive. They don't back down. They plot. They scheme. And they come back with papers, letters, and threats. I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The air felt calmer now. But my mind wasn't at ease. I could still hear the inspector's words. The board will hear about it. I imagined them sitting around their long, polished table, whispering about me. The problem homeowner. The man who didn't bend. The man who made their surveyors run. I pictured their smug faces, their pens scratching fines onto paper, their hands sending letters designed to scare and control. That night, as I locked my door, a strange thought came to me. Why does a group of neighbors need this much power? Why do they care more about rules than people? And why do they always believe fear will win? I slept uneasy. Dreams filled with pounding on my door. Dreams of faceless men in yellow vests. Dreams of my yard being sliced up by invisible lines, every blade of grass labeled HOA property. By morning, my fear had turned into something else. Resolve, because if the HOA thought I would bow, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Later that day, a letter appeared in my mailbox. No stamp. No envelope. Just folded paper shoved inside. The handwriting was neat. Almost too neat. It read, Homeowners Association Notice. You are in violation of covenant. 14.2. Unauthorized display of firearms. Further action will be taken. My fists clenched so hard the paper crumpled. Unauthorized display of firearms? On my land? In my yard? This wasn't about firearms. This was about power. This was about sending me a message. That they were watching. That they weren't done. I sat back on the porch with the letter in my hand, and I realized something chilling. They hadn't just seen the shotgun, they had expected it, almost like they wanted me to do it, like they had set me up for this exact moment. A trap, hidden under the cover of rules. And suddenly the game felt different. It wasn't just me against some surveyors with clipboards. It was me against an entire system, a system built on fear, fines, and neighbors turned into enemies. The real battle wasn't going to be fought with a gun. It was going to be fought with patience, with strategy, and with something the HOA never saw coming. The letter sat in my lap, crumpled but heavy, like it carried more weight than the paper itself. I read the words again and again, each line dripping with arrogance, each word crafted to remind me. They had power, and I didn't. Violation of Covenant 14.2. Unauthorized display of firearms. It was almost laughable, except it wasn't funny. It was a threat disguised as paperwork. The HOA wasn't angry because I scared their surveyors. They were angry because I reminded them I wasn't afraid. And in their world, fear was the only currency that mattered. That night, I barely slept. I sat by the window with the shotgun resting against the wall. The moonlight cut across my yard, the same yard they wanted to carve up with their survey stakes. Every shadow felt like a trespasser, every sound like a new survey truck pulling in. By morning, my anger had hardened into something sharper. I wasn't just defending my land anymore, I was defending the idea of owning anything at all, because if a group of neighbors with clipboards and titles could walk onto my property and call it theirs, what did homeowner even mean? The next day, another letter came. This one official. Sealed. Stamped with the HOA logo like a brand of authority. It read, Second Notice. Failure to comply with HOA guidelines. You are required to attend a disciplinary hearing on Monday at 6 p.m. Failure to attend will result in additional fines and potential legal action. My blood boiled. A disciplinary hearing? Like I was some schoolboy caught chewing gum in class. They wanted me in a chair. They wanted me in front of their long polished table. They wanted me small, so they could feel big. I laughed out loud, the kind of laugh that comes from disbelief more than humor. They thought this was a game they controlled. But they didn't know me. They didn't know the kind of patience I had, or the kind of stubborn streak that kept men like me standing when others bent. I went about my day as if nothing happened. Mowed my lawn, trimmed the hedges, waved at the mailman. But inside, a storm was brewing. When Monday came, I didn't go to their meeting. Instead, I waited. I wanted to see how far they would go, how desperate they would get. Because sometimes, the best way to fight an enemy is to let them overreach. Sure enough, by Tuesday, another letter, this one harsher, colder. Failure to appear has resulted in a $500 fine. Continued refusal to cooperate will escalate penalties. I held the paper in my hands and smiled, not because I enjoyed the fight, but because they had made their mistake. They showed me their weapon. Money, fines, fees, penalties. That was their shotgun, and they thought it would scare me. But here's the truth. Money is just paper, just numbers on a page, and fear only works when you give it power. I didn't write a check. I didn't call their office. I didn't even respond. I let the silence do the talking. Because silence can be louder than words. Days turned into weeks, and the letters kept coming. Bigger fines, harsher threats, warnings of liens and court action, each envelope thicker than the last, each threat more desperate than before, and while they drowned me in paper, I started digging, not in the dirt, but in the rules, the same rules they used against me. The HOA handbook sat on my table, page after page of restrictions, covenants, codes, but buried deep inside were contradictions, rules so strict they were impossible to follow, laws so absurd they turned the HOA against itself. One line demanded every lawn be no taller than 2.5 inches. Another forbade cutting grass on Sundays due to noise, which meant, if you followed one rule, you broke another, and right there, in those absurd lines, I found my weapon, revenge by compliance, not rebellion, not defiance, but obedience so perfect it became destruction. I started with my mailbox. Their rules said the mailbox post had to be exactly 42 inches tall, so I measured, precisely, 42 inches on the dot, not a centimeter more, not a centimeter less. Then I painted it the approved color, a bland beige so ugly it looked like rot. Next, the grass. I trimmed it to exactly 2.5 inches, measured with a ruler, perfectly even across every patch. If one blade grew taller, I cut it by hand. I filed every permit for every small change, even repainting a shutter, even planting a single flower. Their office filled with paperwork so fast their clerks couldn't keep up. Neighbors started to notice, why was my yard so painfully perfect? Why was every single rule followed to the letter? Why did my driveway have chalk marks measuring cracks when no one else even bothered to sweep? Because while they thought they were burying me in rules, I was suffocating them in their own system. But here's where it got interesting. The more I followed the rules, the more I exposed how broken they were. If my lawn looked artificial at 2.5 inches, then why was that the rule? If my mailbox was hideous at approved beige, then why was that the standard? If I had to file 12 forms just to repaint a door, then who was actually being served by these rules? The neighbors started whispering. Some laughed at how ridiculous my house looked. Others began to question the board. And slowly, the perfect suburban mask began to crack. The HOA sent another notice, this one almost desperate. While technically in compliance, your actions are considered disruptive and against the spirit of community guidelines. I read those words and smiled. Technically in compliance, that was the phrase I wanted, because it meant they had no power left. Their own rules had turned against them. But here's the danger. Cornered animals fight hardest, and I knew the HOA wasn't done yet. They had lost face once with the shotgun, And now with the rules, they were running out of ways to control me, which made them dangerous. The letters didn't stop. But something else began, something darker, quieter. At first it was little things. A note slipped under my doormat. No name, no handwriting I recognized, just a message on lined paper that read, "You don't belong here." I crumpled it, tossed it, but the words stuck in my chest like thorns. The next morning I found another note taped to my mailbox, this one in bold black marker. "We are watching you." It wasn't signed HOA. It wasn't official. It was something worse. Anonymous. That night, as I walked past the window, I caught it. A flicker of light. Someone sitting in a parked car just beyond my fence. Headlights off. Engine running. When I stepped onto the porch, the car pulled away slow. Deliberate, like it wanted me to know. This wasn't over. The HOA had moved from rules to shadows, and in many ways, shadows are harder to fight. I tried to ignore it. I told myself they were cowards hiding behind paper and glass, but when the whispers began, ignoring wasn't so easy. At the grocery store, a woman I'd seen 100 times before avoided my eyes. At the gas station, a man muttered something under his breath as he passed, and at church, I caught 2 board members whispering and laughing as I walked by. The neighborhood had turned into a stage, and I was their villain. But here's the irony. The more they painted me as the troublemaker, the more neighbors started to watch, some with suspicion, some with curiosity, and some with quiet respect, because deep down, every homeowner here had felt it. That sting of a warning letter, that fine for a trash can left out too long, that humiliation of being told what color curtain was acceptable. I was just the one who refused to bow, and in that refusal, I became a mirror that showed them what the HOA really was. Still, the war grew dirtier. One morning, I walked outside to find spray paint on my fence. 3 letters, dripping red. HOA. I stood there staring at it. The letters burned into my wood, into my peace. And I knew. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. I grabbed a bucket and scrubbed until my arms ached. But even after the paint was gone, the stain remained. Not on the fence. On me. That night, I sat at my table with the handbook open again, flipping page after page, looking for their weak spots. Because if they wanted psychological warfare, I was ready to give it back. I started small, every rule they ignored. I documented every car parked overnight, every trash can left out, every lawn too tall, photos, dates, times, a collection of their own hypocrisy. And then I shared it, not in public, not in a meeting, but quietly, neighbor to neighbor. Did you know the HOA president's mailbox is an inch too tall? Did you know the treasurer's lawn hasn't been cut in weeks? The whispers spread faster than wildfire, because nothing destroys authority quicker than exposed hypocrisy. Soon, the same neighbors who avoided my eyes were knocking on my door. "Hey, what they did to your fence? That wasn't right. I got a fine last month too. Maybe we should talk. They've been after you, but we all see what's going on." The board had tried to isolate me, but instead they turned me into a rallying point, and in suburbia, nothing spreads faster than gossip. The letters kept coming, but now they read weaker. The fines piled up, but fewer people cared. And the anonymous notes? They started to feel desperate, childish, like the last kicks of a bully losing his grip. Still, the shadows lingered. One evening I came home to find my porch light shattered, glass scattered across the steps. No note this time, no warning, just silence. And that silence felt louder than anything else. Was it the board? Was it a neighbor? Or was it someone who simply enjoyed the chaos? I stood in that broken glass and realized something chilling. This fight wasn't about grass height or mailboxes anymore. It wasn't even about property lines. It was about control. The HOA had built its power on fear, and when fear stopped working, they turned to chaos. And chaos is dangerous, because you can predict fines, you can fight rules, but you can't predict what a desperate man will do in the dark. I slept with one eye open after that. Shotgun by the door, handbook on the table, letters stacked like evidence of a crime, because that's what this was now. A crime of control. And yet, a strange thought kept creeping into my mind. What if this wasn't just about me? What if the board was using me as an example? What if my war was just the warning they wanted to send to everyone else? If that was true, then I had a choice. Keep defending myself quietly or make this battle so loud, so public, that the HOA couldn't hide behind shadows anymore. The board wanted fear. But what if I gave them exposure instead? What if I dragged every one of their secrets into the light? What if I turned their psychological games back on them? That question kept me awake long into the night. As the streetlights flickered and the silence pressed against my walls, I decided something that night. No more silence, no more shadows. If the HOA wanted a war, I would give them one, but not the kind they expected. I wasn't going to hide. I wasn't going to whisper. I was going to drag their secrets into the sunlight. The next morning, I printed copies of every photo I had taken, every trash can left out, every cracked driveway, every mailbox painted the wrong shade, and most of all, the president's own violations. Her lawn, higher than mine, her shutters, the wrong color, her fence, 6 inches over the limit. I didn't send them to the board. No, I stapled them to wooden stakes and planted them right in my front yard. Or a gallery of HOA hypocrisy for every neighbor walking their dog, for every car passing by, for every child riding a bike down the street. The truth was on display. By noon, I was the talk of the neighborhood. Some laughed, some shook their heads, but many stopped, stared, and whispered. By evening, I wasn't alone anymore. 2 neighbors came to my porch, a retired man with tired eyes, and a young mother pushing a stroller. Both carried their own stack of letters, both filled with fines, warnings, threats. They fined me because my son left his bike in the driveway overnight, the woman said. They fined me because my American flag was too big, the man said. They weren't just stories, they were proof. Proof that this wasn't about me anymore. This was about everyone. Word spread fast. By the end of the week, my porch had become a meeting place. People brought coffee, donuts, even lawn chairs. And together we read letters, compared violations, and laughed at the absurdity. A community the HOA tried to control was slowly turning into a community that resisted. But the board didn't take it lightly. On Friday evening, I came home to find a new letter taped to my door. This one in bold red letters. Cease and desist. Unauthorized display of materials. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action. I laughed so hard I almost fell off the porch. Cease and desist. For telling the truth? For following their rules so perfectly, they crumbled under the weight of their own contradictions. That night, I gathered the neighbors again. We sat in my yard under the porch light. The letters spread out like evidence at a trial, and we decided something simple. If they wanted us quiet, we'd be louder. If they wanted us divided, we'd be united. So we made copies, dozens of copies, every violation, every fine, every ridiculous rule. And the next morning, we delivered them. Not to the board, not to the HOA office, but door to door, house to house. Every homeowner in the subdivision got a packet of truth by afternoon 2. The board called an emergency meeting. They sent out notices, urgent, panicked. The HOA was concerned about the spread of misinformation. Misinformation? These were their own words, their own rules, their own signatures. The meeting was packed, every chair filled, neighbors standing in the back, some spilling into the hallway. The board sat at their table, stiff, sweating, trying to control the room. The president started with her usual smile. But this time, it cracked fast, because the crowd wasn't silent, the crowd wasn't obedient, the crowd had questions, loud questions. Why did you fine me for my shutters when yours are the wrong color? Why is his mailbox beige when yours is brown? Why are we paying dues when the roads are falling apart? Why are you threatening homeowners for defending their land? The president tried to shout over them. The treasurer pounded his gavel, but the noise was louder than their authority. The board wasn't in control anymore. The people were. I sat near the back, arms folded, watching it unfold, and I realized something powerful. This wasn't my fight anymore. This was everyone's fight. And once people lose their fear, the board loses everything. The meeting ended in chaos. The board stormed out. The neighbors stayed, talking, planning, laughing even. The spell was broken. But here's the thing about power. It never dies easy. It doesn't vanish quietly. It claws. It scratches. It finds new ways to survive. That night, I got another letter. Not in my mailbox this time, but slipped under my door. This is war. You'll regret what you started. No HOA stamp, no signature, just words dripping with hate. It didn't scare me, but it did remind me of something important. When you stand up to bullies, they stop playing by their own rules. I sat there holding that paper, staring into the dark, and I asked myself, how far would they go? Would they drain my bank account with fines? Would they drag me into court? Or would they go darker, uglier, more dangerous? Because sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who feels like they're losing everything. The next day, the whispers grew. I heard neighbors say the board was planning legal action. Others said they were calling the county. Some said they were looking for ways to strip me of my property altogether. The tension in the neighborhood was heavy. Every step felt like walking on cracked ice. Every shadow felt like it carried eyes. Every passing car slowed just a little too long. And yet, even in the fear, there was something else. A fire in the neighbors who once avoided me, a courage in the voices who once whispered, a unity that no rulebook could erase. The board had woken something they couldn't control, and I wasn't sure how far it would go. But I knew one thing. The battle lines were drawn, and this was no longer just about me. The letter that read, "This is war," wasn't a bluff. I knew it the moment I held the paper in my hand. The handwriting was sharp, angry, desperate, and desperate enemies are always the most dangerous. The next week, I got a thick envelope in the mail, not a fine this time, not a warning, but something heavier. Notice of pending legal action. My stomach tightened as I read the words. The HOA was taking me to court, claiming I was endangering the community, claiming I was inciting unrest, claiming I was creating a hostile environment. It was laughable, but also terrifying, because courtrooms aren't about truth, they're about power. And the board had money, lawyers, and influence on their side. I sat at my table that night, the shotgun on one side, the handbook on the other, and I realized this was no longer about fences, mailboxes, or lawns. This was about survival. The board wanted to crush me, not with fists, not with guns, but with papers, stamps, and judges. But they underestimated one thing. I wasn't alone anymore. When word spread out the lawsuit, my neighbors rallied. The same man who had been fined for his flag, the mother who had been threatened over a bicycle, the families who had been harassed for trash cans and paint colors. They all showed up at my door. Some carried their own stacks of letters, some carried stories of threats and fines, and some carried donations. "Use this for a lawyer," the retired man said, slipping me a folded check. "Whatever they throw at you, we've got your back," the young mother whispered, and for the first time since this war began, I felt stronger than the board itself. Still, the HOA didn't stop at legal threats. They wanted to break me before court. Late at night, cars slowed in front of my house, headlights off, engines humming. A shadow moved near my fence, and when I went outside, the boards were cracked. My trash can was tipped over, my mailbox smashed with a bat, and spray paint again. This time across my garage door. "Community traitor." I stood there in the dark, staring at those words. The anger boiled, but so did something else. Resolve. Because every act of vandalism only proved my point. The HOA wasn't about order or community. It was about control and intimidation. I cleaned the paint off at sunrise, but I didn't hide it. No. I left the stain for everyone to see. Neighbors walked by, shaking their heads, muttering, and I could see it in their eyes. They knew the truth now. The board was losing control of the story. The next HOA meeting was different. The board sat stiff at their table, legal papers stacked high, but the crowd was larger than ever, and this time, it wasn't whispers, it was shouting. "Why are you suing one of your own neighbors? Why are dues going to lawyers instead of repairs? Why are you threatening families instead of helping them?" The president tried to speak, but her words drowned under the voices of angry homeowners, the teeths. Reschurer slammed his gavel again and again, but the crowd only grew louder. And then it happened. One man stood up in the back, holding a letter above his head. A fine he had received just days before. He read it out loud, and the crowd erupted in laughter because the violation was absurd. He had been fined for planting flowers of unapproved color. Flowers. The HOA was at war over flowers. The laughter spread like fire. And in that laughter, the board lost something vital. Their authority. I didn't speak that night. I didn't need to. The community was speaking for me. But the board wasn't done. They doubled down. Letters turned into threats of liens, threats of property seizure, threats of ruining credit scores. They weren't just trying to scare me anymore. They were trying to destroy me. And still, I didn't bend. I documented everything. Every letter, every photo, every note. I filed copies with the county. I filed complaints with state agencies. I even spoke with a reporter from the local paper, because if the HOA wanted a fight in court, I would drag them into the court of public opinion first. Days turned into weeks. The pressure built like a storm ready to break. Neighbors picked sides. Some stood with me. Others hid in fear, siding with the board. The subdivision turned into a battlefield. Lawns became trenches. Fences became borders. Every mailbox felt like a flag planted in enemy soil, and in the middle of it all was me. The man with the shotgun, the man with the rule book, the man the HOA couldn't silence. But here's the thing I couldn't shake. What if they went further? What if this wasn't just about papers and paint anymore? What if the board, desperate and cornered, did something reckless? I kept my shotgun close. I locked my doors at night. I installed cameras along my fence, because I knew. When men in power feel it slipping through their fingers, they will do anything to keep it, anything. And so the question that haunted me wasn't whether I could win this war, it was whether I could survive it. The lawsuit date came faster and I thought, one moment I was standing in my yard with a shotgun. The next I was standing in a courtroom with a suit and tie. The HOA sat across from me. The president, smug but nervous. The treasurer, red-faced, shuffling papers. Their lawyer, polished, expensive, every word sharp as a blade. They thought they had me cornered. They thought the courtroom was their home turf. But what they didn't count on was that I came prepared. When the judge called us forward, the lawyer started his attack. He painted me as a dangerous man, unstable, reckless, a threat to community harmony. He spoke of weapons displayed in public, of harassment of officials, of acts of rebellion against lawful authority. The board members nodded along, every word dripping with poison. They thought the story was theirs to tell. But when it was my turn, I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply placed a box on the table. A box filled with letters, photos, recordings, evidence. One by one, I laid them out. Photos of surveyors trespassing. Letters of absurd fines. Notes slipped under my door with threats. Spray paint on my fence. On my garage. And finally, the stack of rules. Rules the board themselves had broken. The courtroom was silent. The judge flipped through the photos slowly. Neighbors who had come to watch shifted in their seats. And I saw it. The smug look on the president's face crack for the first time. Their lawyer tried to object, tried to spin the story back their way, but the damage was done. The truth was too heavy to bury. When the hearing ended, the judge didn't make a ruling that day. He said he needed time to review the evidence thoroughly. But I didn't need his ruling to know what had happened. The HOA had lost something far more valuable than a case. They had lost their mask. Word spread through the neighborhood like fire. The mighty board, the untouchable rulers of our cul-de-sac, were just petty people hiding behind paperwork. And now, everyone knew it. In the weeks that followed, neighbors grew bolder. Fines were challenged. Meetings were stormed with questions. Payments were delayed. The board's power slipped through their fingers like sand, and the more they tried to grip tighter, the faster it fell. But here's the truth. This wasn't a fairy tale. They didn't disappear overnight. The board fought to hold on. They screamed lawsuits. They whispered liens. They begged the county to step in. Yet no matter what they did, they couldn't erase what had been exposed. The president eventually resigned. Her house went up for sale. A for sale sign planted in the perfect grass she once policed. The treasurer followed soon after. He vanished without a word. And the board, broken, shrank into something small and quiet. For the first time in years, the neighborhood breathed. Lawns grew an inch taller without punishment. Flags flew without tape measures. Kids left bikes in driveways without fines. And me? I finally sat on my porch in peace, coffee in one hand, the shotgun leaning against the wall, watching the sunset without fear of surveyors or threats. But peace doesn't mean forgetfulness, because I knew deep down. HOAs don't really die. They wait. They rebuild. They find new faces, new rules, new ways to crawl back into power. The system wasn't gone. It was only sleeping. And maybe one day, another homeowner will wake up to surveyors on their lawn. Maybe another man will hear the arrogance of HOA land. Maybe another family will find themselves buried in letters and fines. And when that day comes, I hope they remember this story. Not because of the shotgun, not because of the letters, but because fear only works if you let it. Neighbors unit. It are stronger than boards divided, and no paper, no fine, no stamp of authority can ever truly own a man's home. I looked out at my yard, my land, and I smiled, because no matter what papers they wrote, no matter what threats they made, this ground was mine, and if they ever came back, well, they already knew the sound that would greet them, the sharp, echoing pump of a shotgun. Now let me ask you, if you had lived through this war, if you had seen the HOA try to crush you with papers, threats, and shadows, would you forgive and move on when they finally crumbled? Or would you take your victory and make sure they could never rise again?